When I awoke from my dreamless sleep, I was just in time to witness the end of the world.
Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII is a highly strange piece of software, and yet it is an unpolished diamond in the Final Fantasy franchise. In the following review, I'm going to explain myself for this highly controversial statement.
The feast at the end of time. The last revelry to say farewell. The people here know that it's almost over.
Yeah. Only 13 days to go.
The strange stuff already starts at the title. Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII is a weird title. It is the third part of the 13 trilogy. As if the second game wasn't enough, Square Enix decided to give players with the third game of the controversial series. The big question is, why the game isn't called 13-3? According to the developers, new players who hadn't had a chance to play the old games should also be targeted. The title 13-3 would communicate that one has to play the other prior two games as well.
It's the chaos. Do you want to turn back?
Too late now.
What are you doing? The Savior.
The devs wanted Lightning Returns to be enjoyable for new players too. A lot of counter-arguments to the statement can be found in the game though. The characters, the lore, and the themes from the previous games are all here and they aren't reintroduced for newcomers. Lightning Returns is a game for fans of the two prior games. Someone who quit the first game after 2 hours out of boredom won't even touch this game. Personally, as someone who invested a lot of time in the 13 series, the game is incredible. Incredible, but far from flawless. After the events of 13-2, the destruction of the world through the chaos of Valhalla is unstoppable. Lightning was woken from her sleep by God Bunivalse. The world is going to end in 13 days. Lightning becomes the savior and is tasked with rescuing as many souls as possible. Those souls are supposed to live in a world that Bunivalse creates after the end. As a reward, God promises to resurrect Lightning's sister, Sarah. Seems quite far-fetched, but let's work with it for now. The universe is almost completely devoured by the chaos. Since 500 years, time stands still. Nobody ages, nobody's born, and no one dies due to aging. Only 4 big areas are habitable. The first is Luxerion, the divine city of light where the Order reigns. The Order is the religion that worships Bunivalse and prays for salvation. The less religious population lives in Yusnan, the city that never sleeps. Here parties are thrown every night and many amusements wait until the unavoidable end comes. The Wildlands are a big area with lush nature. Here many small settlements can be found inhabited by hunters. Many dangerous monsters are here too. Last, there are the Dead Dunes. This area is a huge desert. Underneath, however, a network of tunnels and ruins can be found.
"500 years ago, chaos was unleashed, and our world began to be consumed. 5 short centuries. That's what it took to destroy all of creation. Now there's barely anything left at all.
And when the Savior has used all her light, the bells will toll and the world will end. Is that what you told me?
Yes, but when that time comes, Bunivalse will finally awaken, and he'll bend his great will to create a new world."
Right. And in the meantime, I've got some souls to save.
Yes, as many as you can. Remember, every soul you leave behind will be lost for all eternity.
Lightning has 13 days for a mission and the game makes this very clear. The player is constantly reminded that time passes by. next to the mini-map, a clock is always ticking. At the beginning, Lightning only has 5 days available, but the more souls she collects, the more time she gets. 5 big main quests wait for Lightning. All have something to do with the character from the previous 2 games. Besides that, there's a huge list of side missions. With each completed quest, Lightning collects souls and extends her time. The great thing about Lightning Returns is the fact that the game is completely open. After the introduction, the player can freely decide where to go next and what missions to tackle. The biggest point of criticism, the linearity, was already addressed in 13.2, but it seems LR is going all out on this front. What might be stressful for some is the fact that the clock is always ticking when traversing the open world. 2 seconds in the real world represent a minute in the game. During cutscenes, fights and in the menu, time stops, however. Many missions underlie a time restriction. Some characters only show up during a specific time, and some parts of the map are only accessible during day or night. It is important to plan each day because ideally, Lightning should complete as many side quests as possible. Only through missions, Lightning becomes stronger. Battles only reward EP. EP can be used for special abilities. There's the possibility to heal yourself, teleport, or even to stop time for a few moments. A big part of why the game is so fascinating to me is the atmosphere. Over the course of the game, Lightning meets a lot of characters that all deal differently with the upcoming apocalypse. Some are tired to have lived for 500 years, others fear the ultimate end. It's nice that every side quest has a little story around it. The NPCs or souls need to be saved, all have wishes that need to be fulfilled before the end. Some are trivial fetch quests, others have a few minutes of dialogue where you can find more about the world, the characters and the story. The 4 different environments also contribute to the atmosphere. Luxurion is a dark, melancholic and yet beautiful city. In Yusnaan, citizens suppress their fears and feelings through degenerating parties and events. Together with the ticking clock, the player too knows that this beautiful world and this game is over really soon. The soundtrack is, like in the 2 predecessors, amazing. Each area has its own melodies that play during different times of day, and they set the scene perfectly. As a fan of the previous games, I have to say the story really got me hooked. Each character, which made an appearance in the 2 prior games, has his or her own moment in the game. The building tension towards the inevitable end also really works. The story is far-fetched, yes, but it works. With 13.2 and its introduction of time travel, the damage has already been done. With that, the carefully crafted lore and world was basically thrown overboard. Lightning Returns saves what remains to be saved. It is interesting that this game bases so much of its story on the Fabula Nova Crystallis mythos. All games from the trilogy, including Final Fantasy Type 0 and 15, share this mythos. In Lightning Returns, though, it is completely interwoven with the story. It might be a little jarring to be confronted with completely new lore, names and concepts in the 3rd part of the trilogy, but that's Japanese storytelling for you.
What the? Who are you? And what are you doing here? If you're playing around in the middle of this chaos, I'm guessing you're not human.
You can see when you're inside this stuff? Then you can't be one of God's regular lackeys, can you?
Light, who are you talking to? The enemy! Focus on the enemy!
There's a lot of creative energy found in LR, and this can be noticed in every part of the game, including the battle system. Because the player only controls Lightning, she has been turned into a one-man army. LR is also a dress-up game. The player can dress Lightning in various outfits which all have different effects and stats. Some have high magic defense, others let the ATB gauge fill up more quickly. Each outfit can be customized with a sword, a shield and 2 accessories. The 4 face buttons on the controller can be mapped to different actions. 3 such outfits can be created and used in battle. With press of the shoulder button, Lightning switches between outfits in a split second. The trick with the system is that each GARP has its own ATB gauge. When the GARP is not used, the ATB fills up faster. Through this, the gameplay becomes really fast and fun. The player can use actions pretty much all the time, and when the ATB is used up, switch to another GARP. As important as attacking is parrying. When one parries, in the perfect moment the enemy might be thrown into stagger mode. The difference in LR is that there's no gauge for stagger mode anymore. Instead, shockwaves are shown up behind the HP bar of the enemy. Players can now also avoid battles without the fear of being underleveled in the later game. Let them become stronger through side missions. So this fact isn't a big deal if you run away from battle. The catch is that an escape from battle costs 1 hour of time. One should evaluate what is better, losing time or HP. The critical point of the game is the presentation. There are areas which look like they were ripped right out of a PS2 game. The city of Luxerion, for example, is full of rough and unsharp textures. It really feels odd to look at two assets together that feel one generation apart. Cutscenes are almost always rendered in-engine. The camera perspectives are pretty boring, and sometimes it might happen that an NPC blocks the sight or the camera gets stuck. This is quite noticeable since there are a lot of cutscenes. Each conversation is fully voiced, but through the sheer amount of dialogue and probably a smaller budget for the game, the voice acting, the directing and the translation from Japanese to English have taken a hit. Some of the voice acting is quite cringing. My conclusion is similar to 13.2. Fans of the 13 trilogy will have a lot of fun with Lightning Returns. Everyone who didn't warm up to the series with the second game should give this one a pass. For everyone else, it might be worth a try. The gameplay is completely different from the previous entries, and that is not a bad thing. The battle system and the time limit really make this game into something of its own. Also, the setting and lore are very interesting. There are very obvious shortcomings in the presentation, but these can be accepted when the game is fun. It is a nice gesture from Square Enix that this controversial series did receive a proper, full closing. There were highs and lows, but 13, 13.2 and Lightning Returns will always have a special place in my heart. Those games got me really interested in Final Fantasy and in RPGs in general. Through the analysis of these games I have also learned a lot about game design. The highs overweigh the lows in this trilogy, for me at least.